Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about how to survive in an urban setting. While most preppers would agree that living away from a population center is a far better option, the fact is most of us do live in cities or mid-sized towns, and relocating isn't always an option. Knowing how to navigate different emergencies and disasters in these kinds of areas can be a big challenge, and the skills and tools that you'll need to survive in them is going to be very different from the ones that you would need to survive in a wilderness setting. So today we're going to be talking about things that you can do to be more prepared if you live in an urban, suburban, or some other type of populated setting. The first thing that you need to understand about living in a city is that resources will be very hard to come by. Even during more common events like blizzards and hurricanes, things like food, bottled water, and medication disappear quickly, and competition for these resources is heavy during the short time while they're still available. Once places like grocery stores and pharmacies are depleted, it could take weeks or longer for them to be replenished. And if we were to experience a situation that results in a full-on collapse, they may never open again. When you combine that with the fact that population centers don't have the natural resources that they need to support the people living there, things will get very bad very quickly. And when people realize how bad their situation is, that's when they're going to resort to things like looting. And that's probably going to start in places like commercial areas where there's big box stores and places where most people shop. But the longer things go on, the greater the chances are that those sort of activities will spread to places like private homes or apartment buildings. Because resources will be scarce, you need to store as much food, water, and medication in your home as possible. This will prevent you from having to put yourself in danger by going out to compete for those resources during the initial chaos, and it'll help ensure that you and your loved ones have what you need. When it comes to food, focus on storing things that are easy to prepare. This can be canned fruits, vegetables, meats, and soup, along with dried beans and rice. Freeze-dried meals are another good option, but they're expensive to store in large quantities. For cooking, try to do it indoors whenever possible. Fires, smoke, and the smell of cooking food will alert others that you have something that they may need and could make you a target. Good indoor cooking methods include alcohol stoves and butane stoves, but when using these, make sure that you have adequate ventilation. If you have a decent-sized solar generator, you can use it to power things like small microwaves and rice cookers. Most of the foods mentioned above will simply need to be heated up, so they're not going to use up too much fuel or energy, with the exception of dried beans and rice, which will take a little longer to prepare. Also remember that freeze-dried foods and commercially canned goods are safe to eat raw if necessary. When it comes to renewable food sources, having at least a small home garden is always a good idea, especially if you can conceal it by keeping it in a fenced-in backyard. There's also a lot of wild edibles out there, like dandelions, that commonly grow in urban and other populated areas. Knowing what these are and where to find them would be beneficial, but just be very sure that you know exactly what you're eating, because some plants do have poisonous lookalikes, and you definitely don't want to chow down on one of those. For water, almost anyone can store at least a few weeks worth of it in the form of packaged water bottles or portable water containers. Be sure to use and rotate any bottled water that you have stored, because those bottles are not designed for long-term storage. If you live in a high-rise apartment, it's important to understand that you'll probably lose running water if you experience a power outage. For those who live in houses or smaller buildings, you may have water for a couple of days until what remains in water towers or supply lines runs out. If you have space, storing water in barrels is a good idea, along with integrating a rainwater catchment system into your home's gutters. If you aren't able to do this, you can do other things like set up tarps and totes to collect rainwater, or hang towels that'll soak up rain that you can wring out into a container. If you have reason to believe that you will lose water utilities, fill up large bowls, pitchers, your bathtub, and any other container with as much water as you can as soon as you can. Also know of any additional water resources that you may have around you. One example of that would be your hot water heater. Those can store several gallons of water. Just be sure that you have the tools needed to access the water inside of them. Pools can be another good resource, especially if you're going to be using that water for things like cleaning tasks or flushing toilets. But if you plan on drinking that water, make sure that you run it through some sort of activated charcoal filter to remove any excess chemicals. Be aware of any natural water sources that you may have around you, like streams, creeks, lakes, and ponds. Water from these will likely contain both biological and chemical contaminants, so you really need to treat it before drinking it. Doing things like boiling and using the right amount of bleach can kill bacteria and viruses, while activated charcoal can remove any chemical contaminants. Grail purifier bottles are a good option if you're needing something portable that you can use in an urban environment. They can remove bacteria, viruses, and many chemicals, which is something that common filters like Sawyer's can't do. It'd also be a good idea to have a Silcock key, which can be used to access water faucets on the outside of commercial buildings. Since most people don't have the knowledge or the tools needed to access that water, there may still be some in the pipes, even if the water's been out for a little while. But if you access water that's been sitting for any length of time, you definitely want to make sure that you treat it before drinking it. And if y'all haven't done so already, I'd really appreciate it if you would consider subscribing to the channel, especially if you're somebody who's been by here before, you've watched a few of my videos, but you haven't done that already. Just go ahead and just click that. If you don't mind, I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, I'm done groveling. Back to the video. When it comes to medications, try to have everything that you need to deal with the injuries and illnesses that you're most likely to face. Having common over-the-counter medications will prevent you from having to leave home unnecessarily, and having things like bandages, antiseptics, and antibiotics can help prevent infections and keep certain illnesses from getting out of hand. Also, remember that during a disaster, medical services, if they're still up and running, they're going to be overwhelmed with patients, and they're going to be dealing with the same supply chain issues that everybody else is. They're probably not going to be running at their full normal capacity. So you want to try to reduce strain on those. And another thing to consider is that in some circumstances, diseases may be running rampant, and those kind of areas aren't necessarily places that you want to be unless you absolutely have to. Aside from food, water, and medicine, there are other things that your bug-in plan should consider when surviving in an urban environment. One of those is, how are you going to deal with human waste and garbage? Not having a real plan for these can cause you and your loved ones to become ill very quickly. One way to deal with human waste specifically is to have a camp toilet that can be used if you are in a situation where you can't use your normal toilet. Just be sure to know where you're going to bury that waste as well. Another thing that you need to consider is, how are you going to communicate if cellular networks and the internet go down? Even having small things like an emergency radio and two-way walkie-talkies would be better than nothing. Ham and GMRS radios are a much better option, but you need a license to use them while society is up and running, and I emphasize while society is up and running, so those may be worth looking into, along with a police scanner, so that you can keep track of what emergency services are having to deal with around where you live. Your home should also have a well thought out energy plan. Gas generators in an urban environment will only be useful in short-term emergencies or the very early stages of a longer-term disaster. Their reliance on fuels like gasoline and propane limits how long they can be used, and the noise that they produce draws a lot of attention. Even in suburban areas, the sound of a lone generator operating will carry quite a ways. Solar generators, even though they can't power larger appliances like refrigerators continuously, would be a better option in many situations. They don't produce any sounds, and the panels can be placed in a sunny window if you can't place them outside. But if things get really bad, you still need to exercise caution when using these. Having a large solar generator set up outside is kind of something that draws people's eyes. Having a good supply of rechargeable batteries and power banks will allow you to keep essential devices like flashlights and radios working, even if you have to go a while without charging the generator's power station. In an urban environment, you'll also need to place a very big emphasis on security. It's important anywhere, but if you're in an area with a lot of people, it becomes even more important. So if you live somewhere like the United States, particularly in a place that has favorable self-defense laws, take advantage of that. Having the right tools, along with the training and the mindset necessary to use them properly, very well could save your life, and it could save the lives of your loved ones. And don't forget that you're not the only person out there that has those things. Body armor is becoming more readily available, in many cases more affordable. It's pretty easy to pick up something that you could use to stop rifle rounds, like plates and plate carriers, along with more concealable options like shirts and laptop cases. However, one of the best ways to incorporate body armor into your everyday life is to utilize an EDC bag with a ballistic panel inside. You can get panels for pretty much any backpack that you may have. This is my EDC/get home bag, and I'll be sharing that with y'all later this month. You can check out body armor options by using the links in the description below. Aside from those, there's also other ways that you can secure your home. If you own your own home, you can install different kinds of reinforcement kits on doors to make them harder to kick in, along with security film on your windows to make them harder to shatter. You can also pick up barricade brackets that allow you to use a 2x4 to reinforce your door in really bad situations. Now, if you're somebody who rents, who can't make those kind of modifications to your home, have some furniture near your door so that you can easily move those to kind of form some barricades. But if you do that, always be sure that, if at all possible, you have a way out so that you can retreat if necessary. And you can also make your home less of a target by doing things like exercising good light and sound discipline. For example, if everybody on the block's lights are out and your house or your apartment is the only thing with lights on, that's going to draw attention to you. So using things like blackout curtains can be very beneficial in situations like that. And you also need to have some well-rehearsed plans for things like home invasions and fires so that everybody in your family will know what to do in those situations. When it comes to fires, make sure that you have fire extinguishers, preferably multiple fire extinguishers, because accidents do become more common in power outages or grid down scenarios. Also, if things get really bad, the word Molotov might become a more common piece of people's vocabulary, and you might need to deal with that as well. Of course, also exercise good operational security by not talking about your preps or bragging about them, and whatever you do, don't talk about it on social media like YouTube. Uh-oh. Alright, just kidding. But on a serious note, if you're in a situation where people do know about your preps for one reason or another, you definitely need to think of contingencies in case something does go down and people start coming to you for help. You need to figure out what you're going to do in those situations or what you're going to do to prevent that from taking place. Now, even though you want to avoid people as much as possible, you may still need to get out from time to time. This could be doing things like joining the National Guard's food and water handout lines so folks around you don't get suspicious, like, why are they never in line? Maybe they have stuff. Or you're in a situation where you're needing to bug out and go somewhere safer. But when you're away from home, be the gray man as much as possible. You want to avoid looking overly prepared by doing things like wearing tactical clothing. And also, if everybody else around you is looking malnourished and they haven't bathed in a little while because there's no running water, you don't want to be the guy running through town who is obviously clean and well fed. Having an EDC bag like what I mentioned earlier would also be beneficial, as it can be used to hold tools that would come in handy in an urban environment. I did a video over urban survival tools a while back, and I'll link to that at the end of the video. But just as a primer, some good ones to have include things like face masks to protect you from dust and smoke, a pry bar, gloves, and eye protection, among others. In short-term emergencies or the beginning of a long-term situation, some businesses or individuals may still accept cash. Having some cash on hand, preferably in small denominations, could help you obtain items that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. It's just good to have options. When moving around, try to avoid crowds as much as possible, especially if you can tell that there's something like looting or other kinds of unrest going on. And keep an eye out for places where you can exit an area if something starts to go down. But be aware that a situation might happen while you're at work, and having some basic supplies in your office along with a comfortable change of clothing and some shoes would be very beneficial in a situation like that. However, one of the most important things to understand about surviving in an urban environment is that eventually it could reach a point where surviving there is no longer feasible. While staying in an area that you're familiar with is obviously beneficial, you may reach a point where you exhaust all of your supplies and you can't get any more, or the situation from a security standpoint deteriorates to the point that it's just not worth it to stay there anymore. Because of this, you need to have a well thought out bug out plan that you can fall back on. If possible, keep your vehicle in good enough shape to get you as far as you can, and have a definite endpoint in mind, even if it's just a relative or friend's house, and have multiple paths you can take to get there. So if you want to learn more about bugging out, go ahead and check out this video, or if you want to see the urban survival tools that I mentioned a little bit earlier, click over here. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.